Hello everyone, I'm Brian. Today I'm reacting to Is Renunciation Necessary for Enlightenment? My opinion? Hopefully not. But it does go to one of my questions, which I will continue to say that I need to ask, but probably never will. Do you need to be enlightened to end suffering? So let me know your opinions down below in the comments. Personally, I would say no. I'm wondering if it's because some people can end suffering without knowing they're enlightened. Possibly, and I believe because of bhakti as well. When you have devotion, maybe not full devotion, but to some degree, devotion, where you reduce suffering. I'm wondering if do you need to be all suffering removed to be enlightened? I'm sorry. Yeah. Or can you still somewhat suffer? No, you can't suffer while you're enlightened. At least as far as I know. Let me know. Can you still somewhat suffer if you're enlightened? I think the answer to that's no, probably. But I'm curious to your opinion on that one. But I'm wondering if you can reduce or eliminate suffering and still not be enlightened. That is the real question. Let me know in the comments. Let's talk about 2 or 3, 4 or 5 questions there. Anyways, we're going to get started.
The Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain traditions all have great value for renunciation as a spiritual practice. Dedicated renunciates, both male and female, give up marriage, family, employment, and all kinds of worldly pleasure. They dedicate themselves entirely to seeking enlightenment through a life of full-time spiritual practice. Hindu monks, called sadhus or sannyasis, used to wander the Indian countryside, begging for alms, sitting under trees to meditate, and sleeping in village temples. Nowadays, they mostly live in ashrams. Those monks consider the enjoyment of worldly pleasures to be an obstacle to spiritual growth and enlightenment. Obviously, if you're obsessed with seeking happiness in shopping malls, in movie theaters, and in fancy restaurants, then you're not likely to seek out the true source of happiness that lies within you. To the extent that you're preoccupied with worldly pleasures, you'll be sidetracked from seeking perfect contentment and inner peace through spiritual practice.
I guess a quick question here. Would it be wrong to enjoy the pleasures of life? I think Osho would say, do enjoy the pleasures of life. I think most people would probably say that. But I guess the danger is to acknowledge the fact that these external pleasures are temporary. And I think what he's getting at here is if the only way to get pleasure in life is through external things, as opposed to being content with yourself and understanding that these pleasures in life are temporary.
But does that really mean you have to give up all worldly pleasures? According to Shankaracharya, the great master of Advaita Vedanta, renunciation is absolutely necessary.
Whoa.
But bear in mind that Shankara himself was a sannyasi, and all his disciples were also sannyasis. On the other hand, most of the ancient rishis were married, and they supported their families with offerings received for teaching the Vedas to young students. There's a lot of confusion about the role of renunciation in gaining enlightenment. Some respected gurus and spiritual leaders say it's essential, but many others dismiss it. Before we begin our discussion here, let me address the obvious and say that I happen to be a Hindu monk, a sannyasi. I was ordained by my guru in 1993 on the banks of the Ganges River in Rishikesh after undergoing all the traditional rituals of renunciation. Years before, I was a young computer engineer with a thriving career and a beautiful home in California overlooking the Pacific Ocean. But then I moved to my guru's ashram for a rigorous 3-year course in Advaita Vedanta, Sanskrit, and meditation. Not surprisingly, my friends and colleagues in California couldn't understand why I was leaving. But in fact, I was simply pursuing what I found most valuable in life, just like them. Most people find great value in having a family, a profession, and a comfortable lifestyle.
And I would say there's nothing wrong with that, obviously. I mean, the only time it becomes wrong is when you do physical harm to other people, or you, I guess, lie to ruin other people's lives. Truth, different story. Lie, that's the bad thing. So, obviously, if it makes you happy, as long as you're not harming anyone and people are willing, nothing wrong with that, again, in my opinion.
But for me, finding inner peace and contentment through spiritual practice was far more important. From my perspective, I really didn't renounce anything at all. Let me explain. Suppose a man gives away an old toy, like a stuffed teddy bear that he once treasured as a little child. To give away the teddy bear is certainly not an act of renunciation, because he had long since outgrown his fondness for the toy.
So I may have misunderstood what renunciation is then. Renunciation. So I'm guessing renunciation in this one, at least I'm guessing for right now, because I want to know if I'm right or wrong. So if I see if I can understand a little bit sooner than when he explains it, is the fact of attachment, as opposed to, I guess the idea of renunciation is to give up worldly goods, but perhaps it's more is detachment necessarily for enlightenment. Then to me that would change how I would look at this. Detachment, as in you can still have materialistic things, but there is no attachment to it, meaning that if it's gone, it's lost, it's not a big deal. You're not you bought a brand new car and it gets scratched and you're like, no, you're mad and furious over it, or you buy a brand new phone and it drops and there's a cracked screen and you're frustrated at it, and then every day you look at your phone, you realize the mistake you made the very first day that you got it. Not speaking from experience, of course. I take care of my stuff for the most part.
In the same way, I had outgrown my fondness for the pleasures of conventional life. I had already explored the joys of having a profession, a home, and romantic relationships. Even though I enjoyed all that, I learned it could never lead me to perfect peace and contentment, so I gladly left it behind. This kind of renunciation is common in spiritual life. In Sanskrit, it's called Vivekajanya Vairagya, detachment or disinterest that's the result of proper understanding. In particular, properly understanding the limitations of what can be gained through conventional worldly activities. But not everyone who renounces worldly life has that kind of understanding and attachment. In Rishikesh, I met many young sannyasis who were fascinated by smartphones, cameras, laptop computers, and so on. And a few of them were deeply conflicted about having chosen a celibate lifestyle, a choice that would forever deny them any possibility of intimacy with a woman. At first, I wondered, how can they give up something they don't even know? But I soon realized why.
Well, it's an interesting question. What they don't even know. It's perhaps not what they don't know, but it's kind of human nature, I suppose. Especially just say with the people that you're attracted to a woman or a man, that genetically speaking, species speaking, all species strive or have the urge to reproduce. It's part of our genes, and that's the reason why all animals today are alive, is because of that urge to reproduce. Now for the technology, perhaps it's just curiosity. Most animals, at least humans, are very curious animals. So, and curiosity gets you wanting to know things, obviously. And perhaps that's the reason why they're curious about the laptops and all of that. And maybe just want to know more. But that kind of gets you, at least with them, perhaps, tied into the material world.
Unlike me, they were raised in a Hindu culture that has tremendous value not only for renunciation, but also for asceticism and self-denial. Scriptures are full of stories about great sages who practiced intense austerities, tapasya, like fasting, or living in a cave, or meditating for days on end. Those stories fascinated the sannyasis as children, and as a result, they grew up to be psychologically prepared to sacrifice the pleasures and comforts of life for the sake of spiritual growth. Yet the fact is, the vast majority of spiritual seekers in India and around the world are not at all inclined to live an ascetic life or become renunciate monks. Instead, they want to enjoy conventional worldly life while they simultaneously pursue spiritual growth. And they can combine their worldly and spiritual pursuits through the practice of karma yoga. The principles and practice of karma yoga is one of the main topics in the Bhagavad Gita, and that's what we'll discuss next. The Bhagavad Gita, as you know, is a dialogue between Sri Krishna, an incarnation of Lord Vishnu, and the mighty warrior Arjuna. A terrible war is about to begin, and Arjuna must fight for the sake of restoring dharma, righteousness, to the kingdom. But when Arjuna sees many beloved teachers, friends, and relatives among his enemies, he becomes deeply depressed. He can't bear the thought of killing his loved ones. So he considers leaving the battlefield and renouncing worldly life. He tells Sri Krishna, Guruna hatvahi mahanu bhavan, instead of killing these great teachers, shreyo bhoktum bhaikshyam apiha loke. It would be better for me to live on alms and wander the countryside as a renunciate monk. This leads to an important question. To become a sannyasi and engage in a life of full-time spiritual practice, is it ever acceptable to abandon your worldly responsibilities? The answer, of course, is no, and Sri Krishna says that to Arjuna clearly and forcefully. A central element of all spiritual practice is to follow dharma. And following dharma means you have to fulfill your responsibilities, no matter how difficult they might be. My own guru strictly followed this principle when his students asked to be ordained as sannyasis. He would ordain them only if they bore no responsibility whatsoever for the care of elderly parents or anyone else. In the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna tells Arjuna that rather than renouncing worldly life, he should renounce his own self-serving interests and act instead for the good of all. Arjuna should give up his clinging attachment for his loved ones and fulfill his duties as a warrior. Sri Krishna explains that the practice of karma yoga always involves some kind of renunciation, like renouncing attachment, or renouncing self-serving interests, or renouncing the fruits of your deeds. In the Bhagavad Gita, teachings about karma yoga and renunciation are intertwined. There, Sri Krishna describes 4 different kinds of renunciation: giving up your duties, giving up conventional worldly life, giving up the fruits of your deeds, and giving up the false sense of agency.
Interesting. 4 kinds of renunciation: escapism, giving up on your duties, sannyasa, renouncing the worldly activities. Worldly activities. Like going in a cave and just staying away from society in some sense. Karma yoga, renouncing your works, fruit, and enlightenment, renunciation of agency. Interesting. So, when I was in college, again, I go back to the story all the time because it's what's, in some sense, started it. At least it was to trickle into something that started in my life personally, which is Buddhism. Talked about how life is suffering, and they talk about how it talked about karma yoga in some sense, where do 110% into whatever it is you're doing, but expect nothing from your work. That way, if it fails, you expected nothing. If it succeeds, that's fine. It's great. It succeeds, but at least you won't suffer, because if you put so much hard work and expect a lot out of it and nothing comes off it, you'll be in pain, you'll be suffering. And that, again, world is suffering is what really stuck to me. It's kind of it was an eye-opener whenever I was in college. And it's what kind of started this detachment in terms of my emotions. And mind you, I barely knew anything about this stuff. It's just that one keyword, one key phrase, life is suffering. With that, I just started to realize that I must detach myself from my emotions, at least the sad emotions, and understand, basically, so that I don't suffer as much. I understand if I understand a lot of things, I don't tend to suffer those things because I understand. But things I don't understand, I don't suffer because I understand life is suffering. And then there are obviously some things that are just greater than, I guess, the easy stuff to get over, and those you obviously will suffer. That's interesting. That's actually really, really cool how you put it in this 4 thing. Renunciation of duties is escapism. Worldly activities, sannyasa. Karma yoga for words, fruits, and agency. Basically, the last one is understanding that you are Atman, and the body, mind, emotions, action, your karma, the karma that your body does is not you. So the renunciation of agency, I think that's what that last part is. Let me know if I'm wrong or right.
Let's see how each of these 4 kinds of renunciation are explained.
Well, I guess we'll find out.
After Arjuna declares that he wants to leave the battlefield and renounce worldly life, Sri Krishna completely rejects the idea, saying, "Na karmanam anarambhan." By renouncing action, by forsaking your duties, naishkarmyam purushoshnute. you can't avoid the consequences of refusing to act, the consequences of failing to fulfill your duties.
But would it not be true at the same time that by doing the action is producing karma or producing consequences? And by refusing the action is action in itself, but it's the refusal of the actions that you have available. So he could have became a monk, but still, nonetheless, both of them have consequences. Yes?
If Arjuna leaves the battlefield, he would incur sin due to straying from the path of Dharma. And more than that, he would also suffer from a huge burden of guilt, shame, and remorse. He'd probably regret that decision for the rest of his life.
But could not the decision of playing his dharma also have the same thing? Probably regret the decision for the rest of his life because he's slaying his loved ones. Am I wrong?
Sri Krishna continues, Nacha sannyasnat eva, not by merely renouncing action, siddhim samadhigacchati, can a person become enlightened. Even if Arjuna were to become a sannyasi and immerse himself in spiritual practice, his practice would not be fruitful. Why not? First of all, he would have started out by straying from the path of Dharma, and following Dharma is essential for spiritual growth. Secondly, Arjuna's feelings of guilt, shame, and remorse would weigh so heavily on his mind that he probably wouldn't be able to meditate properly or concentrate on scriptural study. A typical story in India describes an unfortunate man who loses his job. He gets deeply into debt and argues angrily with his wife and anyone else who tries to give him advice. One day, he suddenly disappears. No one sees him again for many months, until a family friend happens to find him living in a far-off ashram. Imagine him sitting alone in his room, not absorbed in deep meditation, but deeply depressed. Depressed because he is overwhelmed by guilt and shame. If you want to live in an ashram and dedicate yourself to full-time spiritual practice, you have to start out on the right foot, so to speak. You can't begin by running away from your problems. And if you do so, you'll end up carrying all your problems along with you wherever you go. A good counterexample is the great rishi Yajnavalkya. Before he renounced worldly life, he first asked for permission from his two wives, Maitreyi and Katyayani. He also made arrangements for their support in his absence. In the Bhagavad Gita,
Before he says that, so essentially, is he saying that you have to, in a sense, have to have your life straightened out before you go into an ashram? So that obviously that your mind's not racing. It's like, oh, I should have done this, I should have done that. I can't. You start constantly thinking about the things that you should have done, which is essentially what Sadhguru talks about in terms of karma. I can't remember the verbiage she said, but it's along the lines like you die 1,000 times in your head because she's like, I should have done this, I should have done this, I should have done this, and every time you say that, it's just dying, But yeah, so is it saying that you kind of have to have your life straightened out? Perhaps life straightened before getting into these? I mean, that would make a lot of sense considering that, again, like you said, you're constantly thinking in your mind you should have done things, and you'll never ever be able to meditate if that's constantly going on in your mind.
Sri Krishna describes a person very much like the man who ran away to the ashram. Karmendriyani samyamya, having withdrawn from worldly activities, Ya aste manasasmaran, one who continues to dwell upon indriyartan, worldly pleasures. Vimudhatma, that deluded person, mityachara sauchyate, is called a hypocrite. His renunciation is a sham, a mere pretense. Instead of meditating, the man in the ashram probably spends his time thinking about the comfortable home he once enjoyed and the tasty meals his wife used to prepare for him. Obviously, he should have handled his problems in a responsible manner instead of running away from them.
So the first part's about doing your duty.
Monastic life plays an important role in India's history and religious culture. Long ago, mendicant monks wandered the countryside, living austere, contemplative lives. They were called yatis or shramanas, which mean those who strive, specifically those who strive for enlightenment. The Rig Veda calls them munis, those who are silent or thoughtful. It describes them as having long hair and flowing orange robes. You might know that the Vedas prescribe 4 stages of life, 4 ashramas. Brahmacharya, student life, Garhastya, married life, Vanaprastha, retired life, and sannyasa. The idea here is that every Hindu should progress through these stages and finish one's life as a renunciate. Of course, very few actually do so. And most sannyasis don't wait till late in their lives to renounce the world. In the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna describes 2 lifestyles suitable for spiritual practice. Lokesmin vividhanishta. In life, there are 2 lifestyles. Paraprokta mayanaga, described by me long ago, O Arjuna. Jnana yogena sankhyanam. The practice of jnana yoga, the pursuit of spiritual wisdom, is intended for renunciates, sannyasis. Karma yogena yoginam. And the practice of karma yoga, seeking enlightenment while engaged in worldly life, is intended for all other practitioners. We'll discuss the practice of karma yoga shortly. Arjuna asks, which of these 2 lifestyles is best? And Sri Krishna replies, sannyasa karma yoga cha. The lifestyles of sannyasa and karma yoga, nishreyasa karavubhao, both lead to enlightenment. Tayostu karma sannyasat, but of the 2, compared to renunciation, karma yogo vishishyate. Karma yoga is better. Why does Sri Krishna say that karma yoga is better than sannyasa? Well, Sri Krishna knows that renunciation is not an option for Arjuna because he has to fulfill his duties as a warrior. So, for Arjuna, karma yoga is best. But if Sri Krishna were teaching someone else, his answer might have been different.
Wonder why only those 2, Jnana and Karma Yoga, why not Bhakti or Raja? For renunciation. Jnana to identify that you're not objects. Karma to is your actions and your thoughts. Well, we'll find out with Karma Yoga here.
There's another reason that Sri Krishna tells Arjuna Karma Yoga is better than sannyasa. Consider this. Renunciation of worldly activities is intended to enable you to devote yourself to full-time spiritual practice. But Karma Yoga, properly understood, is also a full-time spiritual practice. Karma Yoga actually transforms your ordinary daily activities into spiritual practice. How does Karma Yoga do that? Well, it's a huge topic, but very briefly, a fundamental principle of Karma Yoga is to renounce the fruits or results of your deeds. That expression is used a lot, but what does it actually mean to renounce the fruits of your deeds? If you go to work 5 days a week, then the fruits of your deeds is your paycheck. Are you supposed to renounce your paycheck? Perhaps by signing it and sending it to your favorite charity? According to Sri Krishna, to renounce the fruits of your deeds means to renounce the personal agenda or self-serving intention that usually motivates deeds. That's why Karma Yoga is sometimes called selfless service. Let me explain. Usually, deeds are performed to get what you want and avoid what you don't want. In other words, deeds are motivated by inner urges called raga and dvesha, urges that compel you to seek what's pleasant and avoid what's unpleasant. Sri Krishna says that raga and dvesha are huge obstacles to spiritual growth. When you understand this, you'll want to resist the force of raga and dvesha with the help of Sri Krishna's teachings. Rather than chasing after what you want and running away from what you don't want, you can instead renounce your self-serving interests and follow Dharma. For example, instead of going to work for the sake of a paycheck and the many pleasures it can buy, you can go to work simply to fulfill your duties as a kind of selfless service. Karma Yoga.
I'm assuming you could also, do it obviously to pay your duties. So you go to work to get a paycheck that you pay your landlord or your apartment or whatever bills that you have. That is your responsibility. So understanding how much money you need to make, but it's not, the purpose of that money is for, of course, fulfilling your other duties. If you're renting out or buying a house, your duty is to pay whoever you owe, whether it be renting or paying for the house, your car or your cell phone bill or the light bill, water bill, gas bill, whatever bill there is. This is your duty to do that if you use it, if you choose to use it. So obviously, you do go to work, you get a paycheck, but the idea is using that paycheck for selfish needs. Not selfless, yeah. For selfish needs, it's a bad thing. But again, I don't know if I'll say this, but obviously you can enjoy yourself. But it's just always understanding the fact that this enjoyment of anything external is going to be temporary.
Sri Krishna describes a karma yogi like this. Na dveshtya kushalam karma, one who doesn't avoid unpleasant deeds. Kushale na anushajyate, and is not attached to pleasant deeds. Tyagi sattva samavishto, he renounces the fruits of his deeds and gains a pure heart. Medhavi chinna samshayaha, being wise and free from doubts. By giving up all selfish intentions and following Dharma throughout the day, a karma yogi becomes a full-time spiritual practitioner. Sri Krishna also praises the life-changing power of karma yoga.
I will say, I think I kind of practice this amazing, not completely, obviously. I am selfish in some sense. But yeah, I mean, I do try to just do things as my job, and it's a pretty neat thing. If you know, let's say I work in a job that they call me for help. I help people, not necessarily customers, but internal help, and I enjoy doing it, honestly. And if I can help it out, that's great. If I can't, then I'll try to find a way too. And I try to live my life mostly like that. And again, it's I guess the thing that I say that kind of helps me is just be honest and be yourself. Be true to yourself. And by being true to yourself, be true to your actions. That way, it's kind of like what they're talking about here, with Swami Tadatmananda says here in Karma Yoga, because if you're true to yourself and true to your actions, there will be no doubt. I mean, people make mistakes, but if it's an honest mistake, you're not going to beat yourself up over it. Because like, oh man, I'm sorry, I didn't know. You know, you can apologize and understand that you made a mistake, but you won't be beating yourself up. It's like, oh my God, I should have done it the other way. It's like, oh, I knew I should have done that other way because I thought of this, but you know, I didn't know for sure. There's going to be some situations like that, but for the most part, as long as you're straightforward, honest with yourself, and honest with the choices and decisions that you make, I think for the most part you will not be suffering from karma. Huh.
He says, karma naiva hi, by practicing karma yoga, samsiddhim astita janakadayaha. Great people like King Janaka became enlightened. Janaka was the king of Mithila, who gained enlightenment while fulfilling the responsibilities of ruling his kingdom. Sri Krishna concludes, Loka sangraham evapi sampashyan, while keeping the welfare of others in view, like King Janaka did, kartum arhasi. You should fulfill your duties. That is, you should renounce your personal agenda and perform selfless service as a karma yogi.
This is the last one now. The full sense of agency. Okay, here we go. Now this one, I think it's, again, we're realizing that you're the Atman.
The last kind of renunciation is actually the result of enlightenment. To become enlightened is to discover your true nature as pure consciousness, the consciousness that reveals all the activities of your mind, the consciousness that's truly unborn, uncreated, limitless, vast, and utterly untouched by worldly suffering. That consciousness is loosely known as the divinity that dwells within you. Being divine, it transcends the world and is not engaged in performing worldly activities. It's your body and mind that perform actions, not consciousness. For example, when you sit down, the decision to sit arises in your mind. Then your mind commands your body to be seated. While that's happening, your consciousness reveals those mental and physical activities without actually getting engaged in them. So, your true inner nature, Atma, is not an agent of action. Due to ignorance of this fact, you naturally get identified with your body and mind, and then you falsely believe that you are indeed the agent of action. Sri Krishna explains, Prakrate kriyamanani gunaih karmani sarvashaha. All actions are performed by the gunas, the three aspects of nature, sattva, rajas, and tamas. Your body and mind are made of those gunas, and as a result, they can perform actions. Ahankara vimudhatma, but an ignorant person, deluded by ego, kartaham iti manyate, thinks, I am the doer, I am the agent of action. Many people fail to understand that the body and mind perform all actions, not consciousness, your true inner nature. But according to Sri Krishna, naiva kinchit karomiti, I don't do anything at all. Yukto manyeta tattvavit. Thus thinks an enlightened person. Pashyan shranvan sprashan jigran, even while looking, listening, touching, or smelling. Ashnan gachan swapan shwasan, or while eating, moving, sleeping, or breathing. By gaining knowledge of Atma, those who are enlightened renounce all actions by ceasing to falsely believe that they are agents of action.
So, I kind of have an issue with this a little bit. Only not because necessarily it's wrong, but it's more along the lines of people who could misinterpret this, because they may only listen to this and say, oh, I truly am never at fault of my actions because I am not doing it. But they don't get the idea of dharma, of doing righteous actions, though. So to leave the dharma out, the righteous actions, but leave this in, it's like, oh, I'm not doing this. I'm not causing terrible things in the world. The true self of myself is not doing it, but this body and mind is all doing it. So if I were to ever say this, I would not ever say this probably, that you are not the agent of your action, because I want people to take responsibility. But if I were to ever say this, I would have to say this with dharma, with righteous actions, meaning choosing to do the actions that causes, I should probably remember the definition of righteous action, but I would probably define it this way until I get more about it, if I remember correctly, is to do the right thing, to do the things that causes the least amount of harm. Obviously, you want to do no harm, but that just, it makes it seem unachievable to the average person. So I want to say the least amount of harm, because that at least to me seem like a more plausible thing that they can achieve. And obviously, if they can choose not to do harm, that would be the best option. But to put it in a perspective that saying I can do this, because it's kind of like people who smoke and to try to quit cold turkey. Not a lot of people can quit smoking. It's like, okay, I'm done. No, they're gonna crave it. It's an addiction, and addictions are very hard to break. And same thing with trying to do this kind of things, especially if you're not equipped to handle it. You're gonna make mistakes, and if you see that you're making mistakes, you're gonna be thinking, it's like, oh my gosh, I made a mistake. I'm not. I can't do this. But if you give them a little wiggle room to say least amount of harm, it's like, oh man, I made a mistake, I should do better. Hopefully a lot more people will see it that way. So me personally, I probably wouldn't say this, but if I had to, I'd always say it with dharma, righteous action. I would not have a problem saying you're not the agent of your action, but you must play your dharma of righteous action. I would put those two closely together, because there are going to be some people out there who'd probably use that as an excuse to do bad things in the world. Or maybe, they're just like, oh, well, that's actually interesting. It's not my fault, kind of deal, then, yeah.
Of course, they still eat and sleep and move about, but they do so with full knowledge of the fact that it's their bodies and minds that act, not consciousness. So, these are the 4 kinds of renunciation described by Sri Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. Obviously, escapism is not an option, and the other three involve some kind of renunciation. So, returning to the opening question, is renunciation necessary? The answer is yes.
Again, renunciation to me is giving up it's doing sannyasa, renunciation of worldly activity or worldly things, more specifically. But I think it's more along the lines of I don't want to misunderstand them. I think I understand it from more of is detachment necessarily for enlightenment, detachment from worldly activities. Not to say that you remove yourself from doing things in the world, but remove yourself from karma yoga, renouncing of the work's fruits. If you're rewarded or whatever. Renunciation agency, I already spoke about that. Renunciation of worldly activities. I don't think you necessarily have to exclude yourself, but again, I think it's probably more the karma yoga, just to renounce, expecting something from your work. I think that would help a lot. And honestly, seems like I keep going to the political matter about escapism. I think a lot of people are doing that, kind of.
But you can choose one of three kinds of renunciation.
Oh, sweet.
You can renounce worldly life and live as a sannyasi or sannyasini, assuming, of course, that you're not trying to escape your problems and responsibilities. But if you're not inclined to embrace a monastic lifestyle, you can instead learn how to renounce your personal agenda and self-serving interests with the help of Sri Krishna's teachings on karma yoga. Then you can live a life of full-time spiritual practice as a karma yogi. And finally, when you discover your true self, Atma, as pure consciousness, unborn, uncreated, limitless, and utterly untouched by worldly suffering, then you can renounce the false sense of agency, knowing that your essential divine nature isn't really engaged in activity at all.
So the last one will probably just come in, just something that just happens. As you practice karma yoga and you start to, obviously you're not going to renounce all works of your the labors of your the fruits of your labor. It's not going to, again, cold turkey kind of deal. Cold turkey meaning just quitting right in front, or you renounce all. It's not going to happen in reality. There may be some people that it can, but obviously you can start renouncing a lot of the fruits of your labor and a lot of other things, which is something that I've done with my work and a few other things. Obviously not all of it, but I have a feeling I should continue to do more and more of it. You kind of like practicing whatever it is that you're trying to do. You get better and better at it, and as time goes on, maybe you become a karma yogi master of it eventually, and then enlightenment will just come. Whether you're trying to achieve it or not, if you continue to practice the karma yoga, eventually maybe you become enlightened from that. And that's the path that I'm not saying karma yoga is my path, but I'm just saying that's the kind of the path I'm taking. It's where I practice to do these things, I'll learn it. If I become enlightened, I become enlightened. I doubt it, but if I do, I do. And if I don't, I don't. I'm not going to stress over it. And I think again, I go back to Acharya Prashant's one question where he talks to this young guy where he's saying his time is running out, I feel genuinely sorry for the person. He should not be forcing that kind of stuff on him. He should, I guess it goes back to what they talk about here about oh my gosh, actually it does play into this quite well. He's doing an escapism. He's one who quits his job to focus on spirituality. Is it? Is he trying to escape his job to try to do spirituality as a full-time thing? Will he achieve it? Will he start thinking, oh, did I quit my job? Is that a good idea? Or should I stayed in there and waited a little bit longer? I mean, that's because he's rushing. That's the problem. he could, I don't know if he can do both, but having a good job, doing your duties. Oh, video over with, I think. Let me play it out. Oh, anyways, doing your job, doing your duties, and working towards this. Again, just working with the flow of things, not forcing anything there. And let's see if that's it. Renunciation. Okay, so that is it. Okay, and I think I said everything I needed to say. Let me know if you guys, what you think about what I said and about this video. Again, he does have the Bhagavad Gita, and actually a played out version a little bit, which I kind of checked out a little bit, and he has it in, is either Hindi or Sanskrit. I'm not sure. I don't know if Sanskrit is a spoken language or if that's just written. I don't remember. But let me know. Is it both spoken and written, or is it just written only? But anyways, he had, I think it's actually in Hindi, and also he has it in English, and he has it broken up. And I do want to react to those things. I really do, because it talks about the conversation seems to be very interesting, and I think it's something that's kind of needed in the world. Sad truth of the matter is, it's like desperately needed in the world. But anyways, that's my reaction to Is Renunciation Necessary for Enlightenment? Yes, it's kind of weirded, a little bit weird for me, but I get what he's trying to say. Hopefully I didn't misunderstand him. But anyways, if you like my content, please consider subscribing, thumbs up, thumbs down below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next vid.